Hi, everybody. Welcome to the third IPRS Music Plus webinar. Thank you so much for those of you who attended the first two sessions. The response has been absolutely amazing. We are glad that we're picking up topics that are relatable, that you people are asking a lot of questions about. And today is no different. So before we start, my name is Atul Chudamani. For those of you who aren't already fed up with me, I know. Today we're discussing something that's of extreme concern. We're talking basically about people in the music business whose job it is to go out there, especially during live events, and get paid per event. So what I'm talking about is musicians who don't do a normal job, but who play with a lot of other artists. We're talking about technicians like sound engineers, people who are on stage helping with the sound, with the lights. And we're talking about, so you could call those semi-skilled labor. We're talking about unskilled labor as well, which is there in terms of the construction of stage, the sound consoles, etc. So it is about people who are, let's say, daily wage earners, people whose dependency on live gigs is almost 100% for earning a living. What happens with these people? How do they earn a living in a situation such as ours, in a lockdown? When it comes to music, you know that there are three components basically to copyright. There is a composer and an author who collectively are part of organizations. The publishing business, they're part of organizations like an IPRS, the Indian Performing Rights Society. You have the performers who are part of the label business, who are signed with record labels and who go out there and do concerts. When you're part of a collective like the IPRS, as composers and authors are, there are a lot of benefits. So, for example, when the coronavirus hit us, IPRS immediately created a corpus, a fund, which they paid out, I think, in March and April to its members. So, there is some sort of protection, there is some sort of money coming into people who are organized. But what we want to look at today is the people who are not part of these organizations, who are not part of a collective, whose dependence is on, as I said, a gig. What happens to them? How can they come together? How can they kind of insure themselves? We are in a situation today. I don't know if it's already too late for this pandemic that's hit us, but surely there will be learnings from this pandemic which we should quickly look at and adopt as something to do for the future, so that in any crisis in the future, people who are daily wage earners are looked after. So joining me on the chat today are Ritesh Tagre, who is the president of the Musicians Federation of India. Some of you might know, hi Ritesh. Some of you might know him from his association with InSync. He's worked very, very closely with musicians. That's why he's a wonderful person to have heading the Musicians Federation. Welcome, Ritesh.
Thank you.
Great to have you. Joining us, I would have said all the way from London back in the day, which meant he jumped on an aircraft and came here and had to spend the night before he was fresh enough to do this. But today is just a click of a button. So no sympathies for Horace Trowbridge, who is the General Secretary of the Musicians Union of the UK. Hi, Horace.
Hi, nice to join you.
We didn't wake you up early enough, I'm sorry.
No, very, very decent time of day, thank you. Yeah.
So just for as an introduction, Horace is a saxophone and trumpet player, I think, who put his weapons down to take up cudgels for the musicians in the business. So as I said, he's General Secretary of the Musicians Union in the UK. And finally, a gentleman who has been a part of the industry for very long now, someone I'm very privileged to call a friend. And for those of you who are into sound, I'm sure you'll all agree that the soundtrack of a film called Dil Chahta Hai was path-breaking in many ways. And I think that was the first time a lot of people got aware of the importance of sound engineers like Vijay Benegal, who did absolute magic to that soundtrack. The music was great, but what he did in the studio was absolutely phenomenal.
Hi.
So welcome, Benny. I call him
Hi.
Benny, which is a bit of a problem because he has a brother whom a lot of you might know called Uday Benigal, part of the now iconic rock machine of India, which became Indiscreet. So between Vijay Benigal and Uday Benigal, they're all Bennies. Hi, Benny.
Hi, how are you doing?
Welcome to this. So this
And
is
my dad was Benny also.
Your dad was Benny also, and strangely enough, he was a friend of my father's, but I never met your dad. But anyway, separate story. Latish, let's start with you.
Sure.
The Musicians Federation of India sounds like an interesting body, yet there are a lot of people in the music business who've not heard of it. Can you just walk us through it? What is it?
Yeah, sure. Musicians Federation of India is basically a federation which is affiliated to International Federation of Musicians, which has its chapters across 70 countries across the world. And we have been registered with them for a couple of years, and we have a couple of members who are our members, and we have been doing few things for them. I would be very frank with you in saying that the federation has not been very active, but last 2 years since when I have joined as a president, we have done a lot of activities, inviting a lot of international artists, taking our Indian artists to a couple of countries like Europe and China and other countries, and spreading the nuances and the niceness of our Indian music. Yeah.
So let's start with our domestic audience.
Sure.
I think we still need to understand what is this body. So we've heard of IPRS, which is a recognized collecting society for composers, authors, IPRS for singers. So what exactly is this Musicians Federation?
I'll tell you what Musicians Federation is not. It is not a collective management society. We don't get into royalty issues. We are in the process of getting into organizing the entire stakeholders of music industry under one banner. See, because we have been trying to...
Sorry, I'll keep interrupting you because I need to understand. I'm not on top of it. So who are these stakeholders in the music industry that you're addressing? Is it only musicians or is it other people as well?
No, our philosophy is very clear that, now considering the present situation, the stakeholder, when I mean that the artist community, then the audience community, then the instrument makers, then the students, then the teachers, and the educational institutions. See, if we are all connected digitally, then that entire digital connectivity can help us to create the revenue from one another.
Okay, so let's walk through it a little slowly because my processing capability, as Benny would call it, is a little slow. So we're talking about people in addition to musicians. So I understand musicians as guitar players, saxophone players, tabla and harmonium players, etc. Right. You're saying we go one step further. We also include people from the audience. We include teachers of music, just music, or other arts
music,
as well?
Just music.
Okay. So we've got, let's say, 4 or 5 different kinds of people that the federation will represent.
Yes.
And the objective of that is to raise revenue?
No, that is one of the revenues. But the larger objective is, if we understand the concept of demand and supply, in music industry, there we have been witnessing that, the supply part, the artist, the content, that has already been identified. There is huge amount of supply, which is now coming into social media platforms, excess supply. And the quality is, nobody's bothered about it. Now, where is the demand? So there is no demand, and nobody has worked on crystallizing shaping up the demand. How does it look like? What is the demand? From where the demand should come in? What is the profile of the demand? So, primarily, I want to help the entire musicians fraternity that whenever they create some content, if they are directly connected to digital medium with their fans directly, not through social media, then there is some possibility of creating some revenue out of that.
I see. So you're connecting musicians and fans primarily in the hope of raising revenue.
Yes.
Okay. So, Horace, the musicians union in the UK, does it run on a similar premise?
Well, not exactly, because we are a recognised trade union. We're affiliated to the Trade Union Congress, TUC, and we are governed, if you like, by the Trade Union Labour Relation Act. So it's a proper trade union, just like any other workers' union. Of course, being an entertainment union, it's slightly different, and a lot of what we do is not simply representing our members in the workplace, but also advising them, guiding them, providing them with insurances, all sorts of different benefits and services that they might need, particularly things like contract advice and legal protection, and public liability insurance. All the things we think that if you join our union, you're equipped to be a musician. You've got everything you need to be a musician. And of course, it's not the really interesting, sexy stuff. It's the really boring stuff. But it's stuff that you really need if you're going to take a business-like approach to being a musician. We've got 32,000 members, and that's wow. A spread from bedroom grime artists through to first clarinetists at the Royal Opera House. So, it's a very, very broad church of musicians, all kinds.
So 32,000, but these are all people who play some music instrument or sing.
That's correct. Yes, that's right. Our criteria is that you earn some of your living from music. So it doesn't have to be all your living. It can be, we have part-time professionals as well as full-time professionals within membership. And I dare say we've probably got a few sort of enthusiastic amateurs as well. But we are an organisation for professional musicians.
So all those extremely high rates that we have to pay orchestras in the UK, that's all you're doing, is it?
Well, I would argue that they're not high, I'm afraid. I would like to see the rates much more. It's an interesting concept, though, because in the UK, most people think when they see a musician on the TV, at the proms or at some kind of concert, they assume that they are, because they're professionals and they've trained for a long time, that they're probably earning something like a doctor or an accountant or a lawyer might earn. And of course, they're not earning anything like that amount. And it's always, it grieves me that these fantastically talented people who choose the profession of music and bring so much joy to audiences all over the world are not paid what they should be paid. But that's an argument I have with managements every day.
Right. So we'll come back to the earnings in a bit. Let's move to Benny. So Benny, Rajesh is trying to put together the community. And as I hear it, it's essentially going to be about linking musicians with audiences. They're going to make money. We have a musicians union in the UK, which is focused completely on musicians. From the technicians part, and first let's talk about audio engineers, because that's the poster boy of the technicians in a gig. Is there any organization that you guys have or belong to?
No. Well, there are some. For instance, in the cinema, the film business, the engineers that work for, there are a lot of sound recording professionals in the film business who've got their own union. But by and large, I would say, like in recording studios that are non-film associated and in the live sound business, there is no representation really. Part of the reason, I suppose, is our own fault. I'm one of those. But I will say over here that we are, even before this pandemic hit us, we had already started laying some groundwork towards actually creating some sort of representation. We haven't yet figured out exactly what the format is going to be, but it's underway.
So let me quickly ask Horace. Horace, do you have something like this in the UK where the engineers, let's say, come under one roof, engineers and technicians?
Well, there is a union called BEC2, which is part of Prospect, and they represent mostly technicians in the major broadcasters like the BBC or ITV, and they also represent backstage people at Covent Garden and at musical theatre and that kind of thing. So in terms of actual studio engineers, some of them are BEC2 members, but there's also an organisation called the Music Producers Guild in the UK, the MPG, and that mainly represents straightforward studio producers rather than engineers. But I think there are a lot of engineers who are members of the MPG because, as Benny will know, the role crosses over quite a lot. Sometimes you can engineer, sometimes you're producing. The roles are interchangeable. So there's those two organisations. I would say MPG are the more kind of progressive, modern, representing, studio engineers who are working with the top acts.
So could you introduce Benny to someone from the MPG? I mean,
no problem at all.
Let's kick this off with a positive. I don't know, Benny, if you're already in touch with them. But why don't you get in touch and see if you can at least model some collective on that basis?
Yeah, definitely. I was going to ask for to connect with Horace post this thing. So
I'm just quick drama go.
Yeah, and that's not a problem. If I get your details, Vijay, I can pass them on to a lady called Olga Fitzroy, who is very prominent in the MPG. She's produced all sorts of people, Coldplay, the Beatles, all sorts. So, they're a well-established organisation. They're very well run. So once I've got your details, Benny, I'll introduce you.
Sure, I'll send them to you, Horace. I'll send them to you. So, Benny, just to continue with that conversation. So, is people who do sound, engineers who do live sound, are they the same guys we see behind the desk at recording studios, or is it a separate animal?
There was a time when they were quite separate. I myself have done a lot of studio work. I mean, I did both. It's just that the way the work has been moving and the way the wind blew, really. I mean, I've moved from studio into live because what I find is that, like, particularly for a freelancer, is that the recording aspect of a song, people are tending to use the staff engineer in a studio. So they would rather, because that works out, the cost factor that's involved. I would be paid a daily rate as opposed to the staff engineer who's employed at the studio, and therefore for the producer it costs a lot more. So my own revenue stream just kind of crashed when this shift happened. But fortunately for me, around that time, or maybe a little bit later, I did have a rather difficult period in between. The live, I got a gig with doing live shows, and that's like kind of helped me out. But there are a lot of studio engineers who have moved from studio into live. Some are doing both, but
can you also explain, Benny? So, engineers, like I said, they're the poster boys, and we know a lot of names of people who are, studio and live audio engineers. So when we walk up to your consoles, we find you at, the console. You're overseeing everything, and then you have a lot of assistants. What do these guys essentially do?
Okay, first, thank you for that poster boy comment, but I really wish it were true, because a lot of people would definitely do with a lot more credit. Having said that, let me answer your question. Okay, so me as a freelancer, I mix for a band. So my client is the band. Currently, I'm doing a lot of work with Shankar Ehsaan Loy. So my clients are Shankar Ehsaan Loy. They are the ones that pay me my fee. So now what we do is, when we have a show, we put up a technical rider to the organizer, the promoter, who contacts the various vendors, who provide us with whatever are our technical requirements in terms of sound systems, in terms of consoles, in terms of lighting, and any other set requirements. So there are various vendors that provide all this gear. So now, for me, as far as the sound side is concerned, my so-called assistants are essentially the employees of the sound vendor. So they are the guys who will be stage hands, setting up the stage for me, wiring up on stage, anything, assisting at the front of house, assisting at monitor desk. So so they're not my assistants as such, but they assist me when
but they belong to, let's say an equipment supplier or an event company, as you said.
That's right.
Right. So Ratish, when you're talking about getting one and one together and seeing what revenue opportunities there are, is there any space for sound engineers in particular and any other kind of technicians as well, or is it just straight music to audience?
See, it is if you see, I mean, you have to put everything together. I mean, now since lockdown period is going on, but once this lockdown period is over, and I'm sure that within a month or two it will get over, but still the live concerts will not be there. So when live concerts are not there, then the digital is going to be the only mechanism. But the consumption of music by the consumer, that has to be of the refined quality. And if somebody wants to dish out the refined quality content, then there has to be an importance of sound engineers and audio engineers. They have to understand now. Actually, according to me, the importance of Benny's role will go up now from here. Because in live concerts, you don't pay attention to, sound that much. But here it is going to be part of your documentation. Actually, now it is so wonderful that the entire world is your audience. It's not only India. When you are doing a live concert, then somebody joining from Australia, from Chicago, from Bangalore. So one has to pay proper attention to the sound which is coming out. So that is where I think there is a huge freelancing kind of a profession which will come up for sound engineers.
Right. So at the moment, we're in this peculiar situation where there seems to be a growing demand to do things online. Yet I don't know if we are skilling up fast enough for this to become a substitute, let's say, as far as revenue is concerned, for both musicians and technical people. In fact, I must mention here, the other day, Purbain Chatterjee, the sitar player, gave me a call, and he and Darshan Doshi, along with, let me just get all the names correct, Gayatri Ashokan, of course, was singing, that's Purbain's wife. There was Aditya Srinivasan, Mahesh Raghavan, and Shravan Sridhar. They actually went live on Facebook, and it's not that they removed latency of different musicians performing in different places, which Purbain has asked me to say specifically that, listen, we don't claim to have removed latency, but they've learned to deal with it in a certain manner. So that is still up on the Facebook pages of I think Purbain and Darshan. So do take a look at it, because it is fascinating. This is a step in the future. This is where it's moving towards. So back to Horace. Horace, the unions that we spoke about. You mentioned technicians come under a union. So is there a constant program for skilling up? Because at the moment there could be people who are not very conversant with the digital because they've been doing stuff in a certain way right through, and suddenly this thing has hit them and everything's come to a standstill. So is there a way of educating them, of skilling up?
Yeah, there is. My union has been sending out very regular emails to members, but I have to emphasize here, although the emails are going direct to the members, we're saying share this with all musicians. We want all musicians to be able to share in it, even if they're not members of our union, because we want to show them that we care about music and we care about them, even if they're not our members, and hopefully they'll join us at some point. But we want them to have the advice, support, guidance, information that we're sending to our members. And some of that, quite a lot of that, has been about how you deal with technical issues. Obviously, you can't overcome the latency issue. It's just, it's it's one of those things. You'd have to have a time machine to be able to do that. But you know, in terms of how they can teach online, there's been an awful lot of that going on. Musicians who were previously having to visit their students' houses or have the student visit their house, they're now doing their teaching online. And we've given a lot of guidance on that. We've given them special contracts that they can use. And we've also given guidance to solo performers about online streaming and how they monetize it, how they deal with the technology, all of that kind of thing. Alongside that, of course, because let's not forget, there are some really serious mental health issues around this whole virus pandemic and lockdown. You know, it's the lockdown itself brings a lot of mental pressure, has a severe effect on your well-being, and so alongside the technical advice and guidance that we've been giving out, we're giving out an awful lot of stuff around how you keep, you know, your own state of mind and your own kind of spirits okay during this, you know, crisis. So we like to think we're a full support agency, really. So we've got the technical stuff, but we've got the health and well-being stuff going on as well.
So you know, you have a collective, and one of the things collectives manage to do is take out insurance. Now, in countries like yours, there is the government looking after people who are unemployed, which is something that we don't have here. So do you take out any specific kinds of insurances as a collective?
No, we don't. And you know, look, there are support agencies for self-employed people in the UK, but they are very, very poor.
So can you dwell on that a bit, because this is very interesting.
Okay, so we have employed people who pay tax and national insurance, which is deducted from their wages, whether that's monthly or weekly or whatever. So they pay their tax and national insurance that way. The national insurance is to cover things like social benefits, healthcare, etc. And then we have self-employed people who file tax returns to the Inland Revenue, to HMRC, and they pay their tax once a year once their expenses are deducted from their earnings. Now, the government, as in response to the pandemic, introduced two schemes to help workers. One of them was a furloughing scheme, whereby if you are the first category, a salaried worker who has tax and national insurance deducted direct from their wages, then your employer can lay you off for a period of time, and you mustn't work during that time, and the government will pay 80% of your wages. So that's the furloughing scheme, which has suited musicians who are, say, salaried musicians in orchestras who are on PAYE or pay as you earn. But then they also introduced a scheme for the self-employed, which was the Self-Employed Income Support Scheme. And on that one, what you had to do was, provided your income from self-employed work was more than 50% of your total income over the year, the revenue would look at your tax returns, what you declared to the Inland Revenue over the last 3 years, and they would pay you 80% of whatever your annual profit was. So that sounds like a great scheme, but we have an awful lot of members whose income from self-employed work isn't quite 50% of their total income, and their other income is on what we call 0 hours contracts. So, you know, they're teaching probably for schools and local authorities on the basis of when they need them. And during the pandemic, the schools and the local authorities had said, we don't need you. So they've not been furloughed, so they can't get money that way. And equally, they can't claim on the self-employed income support scheme because their money from self-employed work doesn't amount to 50% of their total income. So these are, we surveyed our members, and something like 40% of those who responded to the survey said they didn't qualify for either scheme. So we put £1 million of our own money into a hardship fund, and we've been opening that up to our members and said, look, make applications to the hardship fund, and we've been paying out money to them And we've also offered our members a 3-month subscriptions holiday, so they don't have to pay their musicians union subscriptions for 3 months, to try and help them. And we've had some help from the Collecting Society, PPL, who have to date given us about £200,000.
So I'll come back to PPL in a minute.
Okay.
Horace. So when you were talking about the insurance, I just want to make a point over here. I was talking to Benny about it earlier. The government of India actually does have a scheme which is called the Rajiv Gandhi Shramik Kalyan Insurance Yojana, as it's called in Hindi, which basically is an unemployment insurance, but it works only in cases like Benny was mentioning. So when workers are part of a larger organization, so if you're equipment manufacturers, the equipment manufacturers' employees would qualify for that insurance. The employer would take out the insurance against age, other kinds of criterion. So they arrive at a premium which the employer would pay. And if the employer sacked an employee, then that employee is entitled to 1 year's salary, no matter how long the employment. Of course, if he does get employed earlier, then that benefit stops. But the funny thing is, not too many people know about this. So it's good for any workers who are part of a larger organization to check about this, because this is one possibility, at least, of some kind of an unemployment scheme coming in. So that's one. And secondly, there are cases like the private players like ICICI Lombard. I think there is Royal Sundaram and HDFC, which have different schemes. There are not unemployment benefits, but it's not a particular unemployment benefit scheme, but it is another scheme on which they do add a certain period for unemployment. So it's good if anyone who's listening has an insurance policy with any of these three, and I'll repeat it, it's ICICI Lombard, Royal Sundaram and HDFC. Please check. And that doesn't mean you go hounding these guys, because it depends on what kind of, I don't know enough about it, but I'm just putting it out there that there is some kind of an add-on with certain kinds of insurances which give you an unemployment benefit. So that's what I'm coming to. So Benny, so when we're coming to this again, things like insurances, wouldn't this be something easy for a collective of technicians and engineers to do? Just to take out insurances, because I remember at IPRS a few years ago, there was a case, we've had cases in the past of members falling ill, not having enough money, but because there is an insurance on them, the family at least gets a certain amount of money for their health care.
Yeah, I mean, that it's definitely something that is required. Unfortunately for us, at least the engineers, we are not, we haven't yet unified.
So that's always the case. And when you're trying to put something together, there are always different, there are different thoughts, ideals, etc. But you have to start, I think, with a common minimum program. What exactly is it that we're looking at? So if you start with the common minimum program, I think that's a great way forward. So even if you restrict it to just engineers, just how many engineers would there be, audio engineers in the country? Any idea?
Offhand, I couldn't really say. I mean, there are so many small studios. I would say there will be at least 5,000 probably.
5,000 is a lot, because IPRS membership is just in that region, and everyone knows about IPRS. So a 5,000 number is a very healthy number, and if you can get it together. So are there any particular people that you're talking to about, or are you guys just getting together and saying, listen, we need to do something?
Well, some of us we've got together, and we are actually just trying to formulate our charter. We have to have a mission statement, right, as to what exactly is this body going to do for this group of people. We should put it down. We should know what we want to do.
One great learning in India when copyright amendment was happening was that if you have popular and respected figures from the industry. So, for example, in the copyright amendment, we all know that the chairman of IPRS today, Javed Akhtar, took the lead, and he was the face of the amendment. So, if you guys, as Horace was mentioning, it's a collective of producers and technicians. The producers are obviously, the big names over there. So, you mentioned Shankar Ehsaan Loy. If Shankar Ehsaan Loy were to get in there as producers, or you were to bring in, let's say, even the film producers on board, of course, that would be very large. But, stuff like that would definitely make a difference. And again, I want to just emphasize again that people who are listening and think that they can put something together with the engineers and technicians, you should talk to people like Vijay Benegal, because, they're the brains trust, let's say, of an attempt to put something together. I had mentioned earlier, some years ago, KJ Singh, Aishwarya Natarajan. So KJ Singh is another very respected engineer. KJ, Aishwarya Natarajan, Divya Bhatia, I've forgotten that there are 2-3 more of us. We try to do something to bring a collective together, but it's difficult, and these guys are trying to worry where to get their next buck from, as well as the fact that there are costs involved in putting these things together and running them. So if there's anyone who's got some kind of an infrastructure that can be built on, please feel free to reach out to Benny. You can get in touch with me, and I'll put you in touch with people. So coming back to the conversation Horace was having with us about royalties, I'm going to ask Ritesh first. Ritesh, this is something that has been in conversation, not I would say up there, but definitely there have been murmurs about musicians getting royalties as well. So is this part of the Musicians Federation of India Charter? Is this something that you're looking at?
Not immediately. As since I'm from corporate world, so I know the music industry, how they are doing. So there are already a couple of collective management societies are already there. So adding one more collective management society, then that will add a lot of burden on the music industry per se. Instead of that, I had a word with IPRS also and ISRA also, that if musicians can join one of these organizations, and then, but you know how difficult it is. But that would be the ideal situation.
Well, the thing is, it's one thing to say, okay, out of kindness, we'll put something together. But the other thing is that if you're a recognized society, recognized by the government, it has to be under the copyright law and for a particular class of work. So IPRS is for the composition and lyrics. The sound ISRA is for the performers, right? So there is
a category for musicians also. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I think let's learn from Horace about that, because I believe that it all started, the PPL royalty share started because Horace went flexing his muscles into the PPL office.
Well, no, there was a EU Directive 96. It was the Performances and Phonograms Treaty, the WIPO Performances and Phonograms Treaty, which gave the right to performers to receive equitable remuneration. And whereas academics will tell you that the best rights you can have are exclusive rights, our experience over the last 20 or 30 years is actually the best right that a performer can have is an equitable remuneration right. And the reason for that is it can't be assigned to a record label. If there are rights that can be assigned, the record label will snatch them. They will take them.
So in particular, Horace, what right are we talking about? The performer's right?
It's the communication to the public for performer's right, yeah. So, if a recording you played on is played in a premises, a commercial premises, or played on the radio or on the TV, then PPL will collect on your behalf. And half of that money goes to the record labels and half of that money goes to the performers. And it's split between the featured artists and the session players.
So the musicians get a share of the royalty as well.
Yeah. It's a really valuable source of income because, as I say, if you're a session musician and you do a session in the UK, then what you get paid, that's the end of it. You don't get any more money. No matter how big a hit it might be, you don't see any more money. If if you're a featured artist and you're signed to a record company, but you haven't recouped your advance, in other words, you haven't paid back the money the record company invested in you, then you don't see any money either. No matter how big your hit is, you're still paying back the record company for the money that it gave you. With equitable remuneration through PPL, you will always have that regular stream of income. And it's a colossal amount of money that PPL do collect every year, well over 200 million. And so, you know, that is what keeps musicians' heads above water, if you like, knowing that they're going to get these payments from PPL.
So because my English isn't as good as yours, I have to ask, what does this word equitable mean?
Equitable means fair. So
it doesn't mean equal.
No, it doesn't. And that's really important to emphasize. Because in the WIPO treaty, it says equitable remuneration, and lots of people have analysed that, and some people interpret it as being equal, and certainly in the way it's distributed in the UK, it is an equal share, record labels, performers, but it doesn't have to be. It just means fair, not equal.
Right. And the other question I had was about performers, since we're talking about performers and performers' rights. How is a performer defined? Who's a performer that is, you know, that the money is being collected for?
Well, a performer is someone who has made a contribution, a sound contribution to a recording. So that's quite a crucial, and again, something that's debated on a regular basis by producers and musicians and record labels and sound engineers. But effectively, I think the definition of a performer is someone who has either sung or played a musical instrument or danced or acted, you know, in terms of other professions. But certainly in the case of musicians, it's either sung or played a musical instrument.
So if other professions are included, so would someone like Benny as an engineer receive any part of that money?
No, because he doesn't actually have performers' rights at the moment.
I see. And what about, so if the music from the Titanic was being played and collected for, would Leonardo DiCaprio get a bit of the money? Because he's a performer there, right?
Yes, no, but his performance would come under a different category because he's an actor. He's not a musician. So he may get payments. Well, he will get payments, but that's all subject to contract. You know, his agent will have sorted out contracts about repeat fees and, you know, additional fees for secondary usage of his acting performance in Titanic. But he wouldn't share in the music royalties, no.
And what about session musicians in the same context?
Session musicians will get equitable remuneration. That's the very important stream of money for them. But the session musicians who played on the music for the Titanic, for instance, will have been probably bought out. All their rights will have been bought out with for a reasonable payment, you know, when they did the session. So, you know, when someone does a session, we always talk about, I like to talk about two different rights. One is the labor right, if you like, and that is, you know, you turn up, you do the job with your saxophone or whatever, and that's the labor right, and you need to be paid for that. But then the assignment of your performance rights for further uses of that recorded performance comes under a different category and needs to be paid for as well. So for me, the labor right is turning up, being there on time and doing the job properly, just like your window cleaner or your gardener or whatever. But then your window cleaner or your gardener isn't also giving over rights that have value, whereas the musician is. And so there has to be these additional payments to recognize the fact that they are handing over some very valuable rights that they own.
So Ratesh, so it makes sense, you know, because if this is a large stream of revenue for musicians, and in the current situation that we are, it might make sense to see if, you know, this, because they're recognized as performers under our act. And that doesn't just mean the principal performer, it means the secondary performers as well. Yes. So in your attempt to stitch this together, you know, it might make sense to kind of put this in the bag, because you are cognizant of the fact that the business is difficult And if you keep taking money away from the people who are investing, which is in our case the record labels, essentially, the producers and record labels, if you keep taking money away from them, then they will find it difficult to invest in the business. So some kind of a solution needs to be worked out.
Actually, when I say community building up exercise, so we have launched Global Community of Indian Music. Now, when I say community and when I say all the stakeholders of the community are going to be part of it, it also includes sound engineers, it includes everybody. So what has been happening in India, there have been many pockets. Like, for example, if we talk about non-film music genres, so nobody knows what is the size of industry, then how many audiences are there, and what is the profile and everything. So that is why if this everything has been stitched together, including sound engineers, Benny, with your commission, so then I'm looking at a picture, a larger picture, whereby we all are digitally connected and everybody is making money out of our own network first, primary, and then secondary, we keep on expanding that entire community, maybe 100,000, 200,000, 500,000. Then that's a fantastic ecosystem.
Yeah, because, well, the good thing is that there is no precedent. So what you're doing has no right or wrong. And, I think
sorry, just to interrupt you, I would like to acknowledge when Horace was here for our seminar, that time I understood British Music Union's entire model. They've got such a wonderful thing. On one side, they're doing so many great things for musicians and everything. And on the other side, they're also helping the musicians with their social media, with their concerts, and so many things. So it's a wonderful balancing act with Horace is doing. Congratulations, Horace.
Yes, it is fantastic. And it looks after a sizable number of people. 32,000 is a lot of people. And, that just brings me back to my favorite refrain. I'm accused of being an IPRS agent always, because I keep telling all composers and writers to please become part of IPRS, no matter, so people tend to dismiss it saying that there's very little money. Of course, there's little money. Please understand that big money goes to Paul McCartney, as I keep saying, because he's got colossal hits, and they're the guys who are going to make the most money. So in India, it's probably going to be Pritham and R.D. Burman, etc., who have the biggest hits. I mean, that's the truth. But the fact is that you are a songwriter. There is some amount of money coming to you. So please become members. And if you are part of a collective, and which is what I've been talking to Benny about especially, if you're part of a collective, much more can be done for you than you can hope to do individually. Okay. So, I'd love to continue talking, but I'm letting you talk sometimes. But I think we're going to be running out of time. We need to take some questions. I hope there are some questions from the audience. But before we do that, if I had to ask you, Benny, for a one-point takeaway, something that you'd like to throw at an audience, it could be your fellow technicians, or it could be people who have money looking to invest in the music industry. What would you say? Just one point you have on the current crisis and, looking ahead as to how things can get organized.
We have to come together. We have to agree on the points that we need to help ourselves. One of the reasons that we've not yet organized is because there have been too many divergent views. And not enough, let's say, efforts being put together to actually, get something going. This is not the first time that I've been part of efforts to, create some kind of association. It started 20 years ago, as far as I remember. But it's been sporadic. But I think now there are a few of us in the industry now, more senior people who've been around for a while, and now we're kind of sick of it. So we really want to get this thing together for the community at large.
Yeah. Is there anybody in particular that you think can be of help to you? Someone that, so we discussed Horace introducing you to people. Anybody else you think Ratesh can or IPRS can help with at the moment, or give it a thought and come back to us?
Most definitely, I will. Thank you. Thanks for the offers.
Right.
And thanks, Horace, for your inputs there.
Horace, since you're sitting in a slightly more advantageous position as far as daily wage earners, as we call them in the business, are, Any advice that you'd like to give the Indian industry and the musicians and technicians in particular?
Well, I think you said it yourself, Atul, and that collectively we're much stronger. And, you know, what musicians need to do is they need to understand that it takes time to grow a union. I mean, my union's been around for over 120 years, so it takes time to grow it, and you have to be patient, but you have to make that commitment and understand that if you stand together and you say together, no, I'm not going to work for that terrible money. If they want a musician to do that job, they've got to pay decent money to do it. Then you know, then you start to make progress. Be organized, get your business side together, know where all the money should come from, and make sure it does come.
Thank you, Horace. And Rajesh, since you don't have an organization and you're not a technician musician yourself, I'm going to ask you a slightly different question to end with. So there is a certain amount, there's a fee that people charge, whether they're technicians, engineers, musicians, or primary artists, when they do a live gig. That might change in what you're hoping to do, link people digitally. Yes. So do you see them having to adjust to a new economy, in the sense of, if I get paid 5,000 rupees for a gig as a musician, I might have to take 500 and that will become my rate online?
Yeah, there is a possibility, but the number of gigs would go up.
Correct. So yeah, your takeaway is be prepared to adapt your rates, let's say, in the new world.
Yeah, actually, the Nehru Center types of venues will be replaced with Facebook, you know, Shanmuganand replaced with YouTube. So everybody will have to change, you know, everybody, they will have to be prepared with some questionnaire. You know, like instead of asking a sound check and all this thing, they should ask you, what is the traffic? What is the analytics? What is a good time to be on the platform? So a lot of things which musicians will have to learn. And the main important thing is that the availability of the content. Nowadays, a lot of content is being available. Anyway, it will happen. I mean, it's just new things. So everybody's jumping into it. That's fine.
Yeah. And, you know, one of the critical things for these concerts is something that I would urge IPRS. We've had this conversation earlier, I think last week. I would urge IPRS to put a structure in place very quickly, because I am getting at least 2 or 3 inquiries a day as to what kind of licenses are required. We did the first session with Priyanka and Simon Moore from Cobalt, talking about what kind of licenses are required. But I think an online system would really be required at this point of time, where people can quickly apply for a license, put in whatever songs, etc., and get it rolling. Anyway, so let's move to the questions. Do we have any questions already? No questions today. Okay, wonderful. Oh, wait, 1 second. Isn't there a buyout and union fee offered to musicians which keeps them away from royalty? That's Adil Prabhu asking the question. So, Horace, would you like to take that? Can you see the question?
Yeah, I can. Well, session musicians in the UK do get a buyout, which enables the record label to take their recorded performance and commercially release it and not pay them any more money. The only time when they get more money after that from that recording that they made is if it's synchronized into something else, or if it's used in a live performance as a backing. But having said that, going back to PPL, they will receive equitable remuneration from PPL, because the right to equitable remuneration is not assignable. You cannot buy it out, you cannot sell it. It's a right, it's enshrined that it's unassignable. So there is royalties from PPL, but probably no royalties from anywhere else for session musicians.
Right. Okay, I think we have another one. Okay, Vishruti Bindal. Hi, Atul, it would be great if you and Music Federation could address the fact that radio stations ask musicians to waive their rights, and hence no one is able to make any money off their performance rights. Great point. Yes, I've seen a lot of NOCs, as they're called, being asked for by radio stations. It's a question of the collective bodies, the PPL and the IPRS, having licenses in place with these stations, which brings me back to the point that I keep making. If the artists themselves, the composers and authors, are members of these societies. They don't need to sign these NOCs because the stations already have licenses with the collectives. So if you're a musician, composer, author, you can become a member of IPRS and a member of PPL or a sound recording association society, which then is anyway paying the collectives. So you don't need to sign an NOC trying to waive the money. And as Horace has said, that it's not allowed. Yes, a waiver of your royalties, even under the Indian Act, the amendment of 2012, is not allowed. So that's the answer to the question. Okay, any more, or do we call it a wrap? Done, guys? Backstage? Done. All right. So thank you so much. I hope people are better educated now and are enthused to get together and form collectives. Thank you so much, Horace. Thank you, Ratesh. Thank you, Benny. Thank you.
Thank you, Horace. Thanks, Benny. Thanks, Atul.
Cheers.
See you.
Bye.
Benny, can you get my email address from Atul?
I will. I'll send you each other's cards.
Great stuff. Lovely.
Fantastic.
Cheers. Lovely to see you, Ratesh. Take care.
Hi. Take care too.
Bye.
Bye, Atul.